All right, welcome back. Today we're going to get our heads around a really specific but totally critical theological phrase. It's called the communicatio idiomatum. Yeah, it's a mouthful. It just means the communication of properties. Now, I know it sounds really complex, but trust me, understanding this is absolutely fundamental to how we understand the incarnation itself. So let's just dive right in. This whole big topic really just boils down to one central question. When the Son of God became human, did his two natures, the divine one and the human one, start, swapping properties? Did his humanity suddenly become infinite? Or did his divinity become, created? It seems like it should be a simple yes or no, right? But the answer, whichever way you go, changes everything. So let's start by looking at one really popular way people interpret this. The claim is basically this, that the communication of properties we're talking about is a literal exchange, something that happens between Christ's two natures. So here we've got a quote from Father Stephen DeYoung, and it's important to know he's actually describing a view he disagrees with. He's setting up the argument he wants to knock down. So when he says there is no communication of properties between his divine nature and his human nature, he's describing what he thinks is the wrong idea. The implication of his argument is that if this is wrong, then the correct view must be the opposite, that there is an exchange and that Christ's human nature becomes something more than just finite. And if you follow that line of thinking, you end up here, right? If the divine nature is really communicating its properties to the human nature, then that human nature is going to start taking on divine attributes. It would become, infinite, for example. That's really the only logical conclusion if you define this whole thing as an exchange between the two natures. Okay, but here's where we need to press pause. Is that interpretation, this idea that the natures themselves are swapping properties, is that what the ancient foundational texts of the church actually say? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the original sources. All right, let's do exactly that. Let's go consult the actual architects of this doctrine. We're not interested in modern takes right now. We're going straight to the historical record to see what they said. And we're going to focus on two key historical pillars here. First up, the Council of Chalcedon, way back in 451 AD. This is where the church gave its definitive ruling on Christ's two natures. And then, a bit later, we've got St. John of Damascus. He's the one who gave the systematic explanation that pretty much became the standard for the entire church.
And boom, here's our first major piece of evidence, and it's coming straight from the Council of Chalcedon. Paying close attention to this phrase, the property of each nature being preserved. Preserved. The Council is basically shouting that the union of the two natures doesn't erase or change them. Humanity stays human, divinity stays divine. This seems to fly directly in the face of that idea of an exchange, doesn't it?
Okay, so that's Chalcedon. Now let's see what St. John of Damascus does with this. His work is absolutely foundational, and what he does is he takes this core principle from Chalcedon and just makes it crystal clear. And man, he could not be more plain about it. He says we never speak of uncreated flesh. Think about that. You just can't take divine properties like being uncreated and apply them to the human nature. This is a flat-out direct refutation of the whole idea that the natures exchange properties. Instead, he's saying the exact same thing Chalcedon said. The properties of each are preserved. Okay, so if the communication isn't happening between the natures, then where is it happening? This is the crucial twist. The ancient sources point us to a completely different answer. It's not about the natures, it's about the person. And here it is. This is the aha moment. The key to the whole puzzle. You've got the initial claim that properties are exchanged between the natures. But then you have what the ancient sources actually teach, that the properties of both natures are attributed to the one single person of Jesus Christ. You see the difference? The communication isn't happening between two things, but to one person. So, with that in mind, let's put together a solid definition based directly on what the sources say. The communicatio idiomatum is simply the theological principle that allows us to take the properties of both the divine and the human natures and rightly attribute all of them to the one person of Christ. Let's just break it down. It's actually a pretty simple logical flow. Step 1. Christ is one single unified person. Got it? Step 2. This one person has two completely distinct natures, divine and human. And therefore, step 3, we can say things about this one person that are true of either of his natures. We can say the person of Christ is created because of his humanity, and in the same breath, say that the person of Christ is uncreated because of his divinity. And here's the classic example that really makes it all click into place. How is it possible for us to say God died on the cross? Well, it's because the one person who died on that cross is God the Son. Now, he didn't die in his divine nature, of course, that's impossible, but he, the person, experienced death in his human nature. That right there, that's the communication of properties in action. Okay, so we've gone through all this trouble to correct a definition. You might be thinking, why does this little theological detail matter so much? Well, it turns out the stakes are absolutely enormous.
I mean, getting this distinction right is just vital. It's what preserves the very integrity of the incarnation, making sure Christ's humanity doesn't just get swallowed up by his divinity. It keeps us from making the huge mistake of treating his natures like they're two different people. And yeah, it protects us from a whole bunch of ancient heresies and has massive, massive implications for how we even understand salvation.
To put it as bluntly as possible, if you get this point wrong, you risk, quote, blowing up the incarnation itself. This isn't just some fussy academic detail. This is the fundamental grammar for how we talk about Jesus Christ. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. And all of that leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. Look, this whole thing has been about one super technical phrase. But what it really shows is that the words we choose, the precise definitions we land on, they are not just games for academics. They literally construct our understanding of the world, of God, and even of ourselves. So it makes you wonder, right? Where else in our lives do these kinds of precise definitions end up shaping our entire reality?